Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We are at the point where we can start to rebuild and accelerate the work of rebuilding.
The province pledges millions of dollars more to rebuild the village of Lytton.
It concerns me how long it's going to take to get things done.
More than 8 months after fire wiped it out.
I think twice, too, about how I'm walking around the city.
Safety concerns amid a rash of seemingly random attacks in Vancouver.
I don't know who's doing random attacks. It'd be highly unlikely it's people that are homeless.
What impact has the pandemic had? And time to make the switch? Do soaring gas prices have more drivers thinking electric?
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away this week. It has been a long wait for the people of Lytton. But tomorrow, workers will begin to remove debris after last summer's fire wiped out the village. And today, the province announced millions of dollars more in funding to help rebuild. As Joel Ballard reports, some people who lost their homes say it's more than about time.
More than 8 months after a fire tore through the village of Lytton, the work to rebuild it begins tomorrow.
I'd like to start by acknowledging how incredibly difficult it's been for the people of Lytton to see their homes and community burned to the ground and to have their lives uprooted. It requires strength and resilience.
The province will direct $18.4 million towards Lytton, on top of the more than $9 million it has already promised.
This will cover the substantial costs of debris removal, archaeological work, and soil remediation for all the uninsured and underinsured properties in the village.
On June 30th, the day after Lytton broke a national heat record, hundreds of residents were forced to flee their homes as the fire quickly spread, including Denise O'Connor, who lost the home she had lived in for 31 years.
Somebody said recently that driving through the town is like passing through and looking at an open casket. And that's really how it's been up till now, until we start seeing things happen.
Waiting and waiting for the town to be rebuilt. And while she's grateful the work will soon begin, she's also apprehensive.
If their track record is 8 months to even start debris cleanup, it concerns me how long it's going to take to get things done.
The mayor of Lytton understands the frustration, but says work has been underway behind the scenes.
Last year when the Lytton fire started, we were just sort of like the first disaster of many disasters that sort of happened around the province.
November floods destroyed infrastructure around the province, including the highways east and south of Lytton, slowing work. Still, across the aisle of the legislature, there's critique.
The residents of Lytton who are living in motel rooms, who are displaced, who are on couches, who have been moved a number of times. 250 days is ridiculous.
Once the town has been remediated, the province says residents will be able to return home and begin reconstruction. But it gave no timeline for when it's expected to be completed, leaving many of Lytton's residents feeling like they're stuck in limbo. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, the stories are concerning. Vancouver police say there are up to 4 random attacks across the city every day, inside businesses and out on the streets. City officials say it's left more people feeling vulnerable and others calling for better supports. A warning, some of the details and images in this story may be disturbing. John Hernandez has more on a very complicated issue.
From a stabbing inside a downtown Tim Hortons to a 40-minute crime spree that left a group of women fearing for their lives, the seemingly random assaults have proved troubling and worrisome for many Vancouverites.
It's really concerning because, I think twice, too, about how I'm walking around the city if I'm going out at night.
This councillor says calls from concerned residents have poured into City Hall.
But I think really recently especially, we're hearing a lot from residents who themselves or their families have suffered and been victims of crime, or they're just really worried about their own personal safety.
According to police, there are as many as 4 random attacks a day in the city, but the VPD says it only began tracking the number of random assaults during the pandemic pandemic, so there is no earlier data to compare the numbers to. A public town hall last week attempted to get to the bottom of the issue, with some attendees attributing it to the city's growing homelessness crisis. An explanation those on the front lines say misses the mark.
That's, to me, so far from the truth. I mean, honestly, I don't know who's doing random attacks, but I can tell you that it'd be highly unlikely it's people that are homeless. They're just trying to, do their thing day by day to survive.
Some experts say stigma, isolation, and divisions rooted in the pandemic might be at the heart of the issue.
So when the pandemic happened, I mean, we know that people have put on sunglasses, they put on masks, they put on hoodies. And they've even looked less at other individuals. And what does that mean? Well, that adds stress to the mental health of other individuals.
And while there's no silver bullet, most agree that more support for the most vulnerable is key.
I think a big part of anybody's mental health is having a place to lay their head at night. Just to have that, but to have the proper supports, outreach teams, that being visible in people's lives and creating a somewhat of a structure.
Calls some member of city council say they've heard and intend on fighting for to prevent more people from getting needlessly hurt. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Cryptocurrency scams are on the rise in Canada. The Better Business Bureau's annual list of top 10 scams shows they jumped to top spot last year. The Bureau says victims lost $1,500 on average to cryptocurrency swindles. And as the pandemic changed people's shopping habits, fraudsters followed. Online purchase scams made up almost a third of all reports in 2021. 73% of victims reported losing money. Phishing and counterfeit product scams also made the top 10 list. Employment hustles, fake invoices, and credit card scams followed, while sweepstakes and lottery tricks rounded out that top 10. The Bureau says 2021 was an historic year for losses. Canadians were swindled out of almost $380 million. The BC government is spending $22 million for sexual assault victims over the next 3 years. Advocates argue it will go a long way to help marginalized and remote communities across this province.
It's essential that people who have experienced sexual violence can immediately access medical services, counseling, and support.
The government says this is the first time the province is providing stable annual funding for sexual assault support services in 20 years. In 2002, the government of then Liberal Premier Gordon Campbell cut core funding for sexual assault centres. Advocates say the lack of money caused some programs to shut down, especially in remote communities. The YWCA in Vancouver wants people to know there are very few statues of women in Canada.
We estimate that only about 10 to 12% of permanent statues in Canada depict women. And so reserved for her is our opportunity to make space for the incredible women and girls who are doing great things in our community, to celebrate them, to lift them up, and to recognize them.
The organization has put up a statue base outside Canada Place. It's part of their Reserved for Her campaign. The temporary statueless installment is meant to make the public think about why a majority of statues in this country are of white men. The YWCA says it wants to recognize women and girls who have done incredible work to build up society. An historic home on the Penticton waterfront has burned to the ground. Take a look. Witnesses said the Warren house exploded around noon today. The home was quickly engulfed in flames. One caller to CBC Radio says within 30 seconds, the house was totally ablaze. A neighboring apartment building was damaged by the fire as crews quickly arrived to tackle the blaze. The home was built in 1912 for the president of the Kettle Valley Railway. Emergency crews are still on scene tonight. BC saw some slight drops in COVID numbers this past weekend. The number of COVID-positive people dropped in hospital dropped by 35, and those in critical care dropped by 6. 11 more people have died in BC of the disease in the last 3 days. The COVID-19 dashboard says nearly 8% of COVID tests in BC are coming back positive. That's down from above 20% in January. And this lower positivity rate comes as BC expands the handout of rapid antigen tests to include people now aged 60 and older. They can pick up a kit with 5 tests each every day for every 28 days from select pharmacies. BCPharmacy.ca has a list of the drug pharmacies or the pharmacies taking part across the province. For the third year in a row, Surrey's landmark Vaisakhi parade, the world's largest outside of India, has been cancelled. But it is not all bad news. Surrey's celebration of the birth of Khalsa has attracted up to 500,000 people some years, but both it and Vancouver's parade have been cancelled every year since 2020 due to pandemic concerns. Surrey organizers say smaller celebrations are going ahead this year, though, and planners in Vancouver say a full-scale parade is out of the question, but they're looking at a smaller parade for under 10,000 people. All aboard! If you're vaccinated, cruise ship season is just around the corner, and the federal government has now finalized rules for vessels and customers returning to BC waters. All passengers must be vaccinated and will be tested before they board at their departure points. They'll also need to be tested at each port of call as well as their final destination. Tourism officials are excited about the return of the cruise ships after a 2-year pandemic absence. The first boat will dock in Victoria on April 8th, with Vancouver seeing its first vessel the next day, April 7th. Our first check of the weather with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Joe, it threatened a bit of rain, spat like minorly today, but it was just slate of gray.
Yes, slates of gray and minor spats. I think you've nailed the Monday across.
That's the band we formed about 2 years ago. It was great.
That's right. Oh, we should do a reunion tour at some point.
We're still looking for a cellist, though. It's tough to find one.
Yeah, we'll put the call out. Blue skies were the story this weekend before things turned. Thanks to that northwesterly flow. And yes, it wasn't a soaker of a day by any means, but we're not dealt with a threat of showers. Let me take you to the current temperatures. First of all, this side of the story, temperatures a little chillier. And yes, it was a chilly weekend with those northwesterly winds. Once we got into the afternoon sun in the double digits, but those morning winds were quite cold. And that northwesterly flow continues to be the story right across the province. You can see in the satellite and radar right now that general sinking of the clouds and the precip towards the southeast. That's all thanks to that high pressure sitting off the coast. Watch what returns likely just before pre-dawn, coming from the east towards the west. So here's 5 a.m. looking to see showers for anyone up early for an early run or a dog walk. And you might want to think about preparing for lingering showers through the day, although some sunny breaks also not out of the question. So lows down around 4, back up to a 9, and we get back into the sunshine as well. We'll take you through the rest of the week. Sneak peek at the weekend. Never too early coming up.
Yes, please do. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Weather update brought to you by Alegria by Cirque du Soleil. Opens March 25th at Concord Pacific Place.
Gasoline prices in Metro Vancouver have reached an all-time high, and many BC stations are charging above $2 a litre. One in Souk will run you $2.17. The price hikes are being blamed on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Analysts expect prices will remain high as we approach spring, and energy companies scramble to find dependable oil suppliers. Alberta has stepped in to cut gas prices in that province. Premier Jason Kenney says his government will stop collecting the provincial fuel tax, which ought to cut the cost at the pump by about 13 cents. The BC government, meanwhile, says it has no plans to do the same here.
The only planned increase is the 1 cent a litre on April 1st. And one of the challenges on that taxation side, as a number of economists and fuel experts have indicated, that there's no guarantee that the price stays down and that the fuel companies don't just jack the price up to take advantage of the margin that you may have created. The reality is that there is significant instability in the energy markets on a global basis.
The rise in gas prices come at a time when more people are returning to work. The fuel costs could force many to look at alternative ways of getting around. Earlier, CBC Radio's BC Today spoke with the founder of Energy Media, who explained some possible alternatives.
Well, before, in fact, a couple of years before the current high gas prices, electric vehicles are really taking off. And now they've passed, what's commonly called the tipping point on the adoption curve. And, last year we saw Europe, electric vehicles were 19% of new vehicle sales. In China, they were 15%. Overall, globally, they're 11%. So electric vehicles are really here to stay. They become part of the mainstream. And what we're looking forward to for the rest of the 2020s is longer range, more public charging infrastructure. And in only a couple of years, maybe by 2024, 2025, we'll see EVs achieve price parity, that is sticker price on the sales lot, with internal combustion engine cars. I think actually what we're seeing is a revolution in transportation models, if I can use a fancy term. And I'll give you an example from my own experience. My wife and I have two cars. One of them was meant to be a highway car, and the other one is kind of it's a small Toyota for grocery getting. And what we're going to do is we're getting rid of one of the cars, and we're going to buy a couple of electric bikes this spring. And the idea is that we'll try to cut down on the number of miles or kilometers traveled by car by using the electric bikes as much as we can. And then our plan is we think that probably in 2025 prices are going to take another little drop and range will be better in electric vehicles. So in 2025 we'll then buy an electric vehicle and will be entirely electric. And that works for our lifestyle and in a city of 10,000. And I think what you're seeing is that people everywhere are taking a look at their personal family transportation model, what they need to get to work, get the groceries, get the kids to hockey practice, that sort of thing. And there are now a lot of options to them, including bikes and EVs and buses. And pretty soon we're going to have autonomous vehicles, kind of like robo-taxis. That's probably end of the decade. Yeah. So what we're seeing is a lot more than we have had in the past, and a lot more coming in the future.
At 6:15 p.m. our time, that is a live look at the Polish-Ukrainian border. It is 3:15 a.m. there, but more and more refugees have been pouring over the border into the European Union. A bus just clearing the border post moments ago. Earlier today, people walking across. The latest on the Russian invasion of Ukraine after this. Thank you for staying with us on our commercial-free live stream tonight. The doors are beginning to open up again at many music venues across this country. While many will be back in business, there are some who didn't make it through the pandemic. One carpenter in Toronto, though, has his own way of breathing life into some of his city's most iconic music venues. Have a look.
This town has been very, very good to me. I'm very thankful for the 54 years I've spent here. This is my way of saying thank you very much. Here's my gift back. I'm currently working on one that's called Not My Dog, which was a small place out in Parkdale. Hi, I'm Andrew Smith, and I'm a retired carpenter. And I'll drill another hole, and the wire will go through so that it looks like it's cabled up. When the pandemic came, I needed something to keep myself occupied, to keep my sanity. And so I came up with a project of building miniatures. It came from doing little libraries, and it was building those that looked like their houses that gave me the idea that doors could be sculptural. And out of that came the brainstorm. I could make anything as a little library. I could even make the silver dollar as a little library. And that's what I started to do. What I've settled on is building miniatures of bars that have closed. My parameters are they had to have live music and that they are no longer in business. Toronto has always tried to position itself as Toronto Music City. Well, my take on it is Toronto Lost Music City, bars that are now silent. I was looking at doing iconic signage. And so I did the Silver Dollar, and I did the Real Jerk restaurant, and then I did the Matador sign, and that's where everything changed. When I posted the Matador sign, the response I got was phenomenal. And I realized that I'd hit a vein of nostalgia that I needed to feed. And so that's what I've been doing, is feeding nostalgia. A lot of these venues disappeared, and people generally have a fond memory. I had someone who was talking about my model of the gasworks, and he said, I can remember myself walking down Yonge Street, and that's exactly the way I saw it as I walked by it. And there's a gleam in their voice when they talk about things like, and that's what I want to hear. I want to see the smile in their eyes.
The humanitarian crisis in Ukraine continues to deepen as Russian forces intensify their shelling. Food, water, heat, and medicine are becoming increasingly scarce. The country says the medieval-style siege by Moscow is meant to batter it into submission. The UN Refugee Agency says 1.7 million people have now fled Ukraine. It is calling it the fastest-growing refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Our Susan Ormiston is in Lviv, Ukraine, tracking the refugee movements and where people are fleeing from.
Walking a plank to escape, 2,000 more people fled Irpin, navigating a destroyed bridge, leaving homes bombarded on the weekend. People are terrified after a mortar killed a family, including 2 kids Sunday. But getting out is better than staying put, exposed. Irpin near Kiev is still a Russian target. Little relief for those trapped in Mariupol, even as Russia announced a ceasefire for safe passage out. But most of the protected routes out led only to Russia or to Belarus, not the rest of Ukraine to the west. A Russian ruse, said Ukraine, accusing Russia of trying to weaken Ukrainian resolve by bombing civilian areas, then promising to stop. Another so-called ceasefire planned for tomorrow. In an evening video, Ukraine's President Zelensky shows he's still in Kyiv, at his presidential office, without hiding, he says, fearing no one and slamming Russia.
Причому вони роблять так, щоб відкрився невеличкий коридор на окуповану територію, на кілька десятків людей. Не так у Росію, як до пропагандистів, прямо до них, на телекамери. Мовляв, ось хто рятує. Ось вони. Просто цинізм, просто пропаганда.
Zelensky's call last week for help from foreign fighters was like a bullhorn. Ex-military and others, more each day, are entering Ukraine, young men yearning to defend the country. We caught up with 2 Quebecers who go by Wally and Shadow on the road heading east.
I'm an ex-sniper. I can train, obviously, the Ukrainians. For sniper skills, soldier skills, and actually I can also be a soldier. I did 12 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. I got out last November, and then as soon as the Ukrainian president allowed the foreign fighters to come fight here, I was gone 24 hours later.
No rifles or military-grade gear. They say they'll hook up with a team.
Because we're the first wave of volunteers, obviously we have to, make our way and pretty much improvise all the way to the front.
Down the highway from here, with most Ukrainians traveling in the opposite direction.
Aid agencies warn that the failure to reach trapped people under relentless shelling 3 days in a row is becoming an acute humanitarian crisis. Ceasefires aren't planned well enough to be effective, and Ukraine blames Russia for breaking them. The foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine are scheduled to meet in Turkey on Thursday. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Lviv, Ukraine.
A children's hospital in Lviv was set up after the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe to deal with radiation poisoning. And as the CBC's Adrian Arsenault tells us, little ones from all over Ukraine are now being sent there.
Into a hospital with little comes a frantic request to share more.
Yes, but in the pharmacy there is no bandage and alcohol, and we need a lot of supplies we want to take to the train.
Israeli medics already out of the 300 kilos of supplies they brought to Ukraine.
You need the blood? No, no blood. If there is someone that not drink and need
you need spiritus?
Yes. Saline, spray, alcohol.
They say they've all but cleaned out pharmacies, but there's nothing here to spare. Of course not. Look at the nurses a few floors up, making do, exhausted adults dedicated to kids. This hospital in Lviv is primarily a children's cancer center. It's now overwhelmed. Most seriously ill kids are moved by train away from areas of heaviest bombardments, ideally out of Ukraine, but increasingly they end up in Lviv and in the care of a spent and furious head of pediatric oncology.
It is a mess, and I think most of them will become indirect victims of this Russian army attack, because they will die because of this interruption of treatment, because of infections, and we can do nothing now.
Trains to buses arriving daily. Doctors resorting to carrying the kids in, triple the number of patients typically here.
It looks like a war hospital, not a cancer hospital now.
It also looks like love at work. A family from Kyiv staying here while 12-year-old Anna undergoes treatment. A young model and dancer with big dreams.
I see your beautiful eyes in here. Very nice.
Thank you. But first she must finish treatment. Then they need help getting to Poland.
What is your big hope for you?
The biggest my hope to go back to home and everybody was alive and healthy.
All anyone wants, but it's frightening. The hospital's windows taped against blasts. The bunker ready for kids, sometimes full of them, but that's not always possible.
It's very, very difficult because of when children are connected to the machine. We can't interrupt the processes of hemodialysis, and we can't immediately return the blood to the body of patients. So we close all windows, we close all doors, and we stay here with our patient.
That means waiting it out in the dialysis room, sealed up windows, machines whirring, little souls needing them to hold it together.
Adrian Arsenault reporting tonight. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, meanwhile, met with his British and Dutch counterparts in London today to discuss the invasion of Ukraine. As the CBC's Travis Danraj explains, Europe's dependency on Russian oil and natural gas was one of the several issues on the table.
A show of solidarity, a show of strength, what Justin Trudeau was hoping to demonstrate alongside his British and Dutch counterparts in London today. The Prime Minister also announcing new sanctions
on 10 individuals complicit in this unjustified invasion. This includes former and current senior government officials, oligarchs, and supporters of Russian leadership.
The individuals come from a list compiled by jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Notably not on that list, Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, who has significant investment ties in Canada. But even as Western leaders ramp up pressure, this admission from the Dutch Prime Minister.
In the short term, it has not led to the result that they stopped the invasion. That's true.
But that's why we are resolved in being there for the long term. The courage of Ukrainians in standing up to the Russian invaders has inspired and humbled us all. And we need to show ourselves as determined to push back against Putin, against the Kremlin.
The leaders were also pressed on scaling back Europe's dependence on Russian oil and gas.
You can't simply close down use of oil and gas overnight, even from Russia.
Trudeau says Canada will support European allies in moving away from Russian energy sources, but few details from the leaders on another major part of the conflict, the growing humanitarian crisis. All three vowed to create a coalition to increase support for Ukrainian refugees, but few details on what exactly that means.
Canada has sent about $1 billion worth of financial assistance and humanitarian aid, but we have more to do.
After that news conference and a series of photo ops and handshakes, Trudeau leaves London for Latvia tonight. He'll meet with leaders of Baltic states and NATO Secretary General tomorrow. It comes as the Ukrainian president pleads with the alliance to do more as the country continues to be overtaken. Travis Danraj, CBC News, London.
For years, Finland and Sweden have resisted calls to join NATO. But as Salima Shivji tells us, there's been a shift in public support for them to join that alliance, as many fear the Kremlin may not stop with Ukraine.
Here in Finland's capital, there's a nervous tension among some, watching warily to see what its unpredictable neighbor Russia is doing hundreds of kilometers away in Ukraine.
Stop Putin, stop war!
A large protest in support of Ukraine over the weekend was also tinged with fear that Finland could be a target.
I'm really against that the Russians started the war, and I'm also very much afraid that Russia would come here.
Nobody knows what will happen, and this is really scary.
Finland shares a 1,300-kilometer land border with Russia, and there is bad history between the two. In 1939, the Russians invaded, and the Finns ferociously fought back. And then for decades, this country chose to be, if not fully neutral, they are part of the EU, then very much non-aligned with any military alliance, not interested in irking the Russians. But the war in Ukraine has forced a dramatic and sudden change in mentality in terms of that tradition of non-alignment. Polls show a majority of Finns support joining NATO for the first time ever. A petition calling on MPs to debate the idea got tens of thousands of signatures in the first few days of Russia bombing Ukraine.
We used to be about 50% against NATO and 20% in favor, and that pretty much shifted overnight. And the longer the war goes on, I think the higher the figures in favor of NATO membership. So certainly a colossal shift here.
Finnish political leaders have been careful to not be definitive in public about seeking to join the military alliance, only saying that it will be discussed in parliament and within government. But Russia has strongly warned repeatedly that if Finland and neighboring Sweden were to join NATO, there would be serious military and political consequences. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Helsinki.
And as the war in Ukraine grinds on, another front is emerging. Both Russia and the country it has invaded have effectively weaponized the information sphere in the battle for hearts and minds. But as Aaron Collins shows us, their goals and tactics are very different.
In Ukraine, the impact of the Russian invasion unavoidable. Not so in Russia. Access to foreign media cut off, the Kremlin tightly controlling how Russians see this conflict. But as the war over information continues, Russia's own soldiers now purportedly used to change how this war is seen at home. This unverified video shows a captured Russian soldier calling home. Everything that they say on TV is a lie, he says. Combating the official narrative at home, this soldier speaks to his mother, saying before the invasion, life was peaceful here. These videos allegedly put out by the Ukrainian government, the website that hosts them now blocked in Russia. Independent journalists in the country off the air too.
It's not possible to get information now. It's closed. It's like in USSR.
On Russian TV, a convoy of support for the invasion. That's what the Zs on those vehicles stand for, mirroring what's seen painted on Russian tanks in Ukraine. The same symbol seen here on this Russian gymnast. The athlete to his right is from Ukraine. From outside Russia, an attempt to change the way people there see the conflict. Hackers claim to have hijacked Russian TV broadcasting video from Ukraine. Still, experts say most Russians support the invasion.
In public image, in public imagination, Ukraine, again, as I said, is not fully a state. It's just a debris. It's kind of a residue of the Soviet empire, of the Soviet Union.
There are Russians who oppose the invasion. Thousands of anti-war protesters were arrested just this weekend, but not nearly enough to have any real chance of stopping it. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
As the war makes it more difficult for people to connect with loved ones, a travel agent in Chilliwack is using her extensive contacts to help keep loved ones in touch. Myrna Arichuk has been running tours of Ukraine for the last 30 years for Canadians wanting to get back in touch with their roots, and she joins us now. Myrna, first of all, how busy have you gotten with emails and calls recently?
Very busy, and the calls came from everywhere, from across Canada, US, Europe. So it's very interesting how many people really are looking to go to visit their relatives, which they can't now, but now they want that contact with them. Maybe they hadn't talked to them for 1 or 2 years or 6 months or whatever, but they're all concerned.
And do they have is there any sort of one overall question or concern when they do connect beyond perhaps just the fact that they know that this person is alive on the other end?
Yeah, that's the main thing. They just don't want to be forgotten. They are extremely pleased to hear from them or know that they are looking for them and to be able to find them. So it's good. It's really good.
Now, almost 1.5 million Canadians can trace their ancestry to Ukraine. How challenging has this been personally for you, seeing what's happening over there and seeing the desperation that some family members have trying to connect with their loved ones?
Wow, it's been a week that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, ever again. I heard all the stories from my grandparents, and it's just, I just can't see, I can't believe I'm seeing this again. All these stories and the stories from our friends and relatives, my grandparents' friends, people who were petrified to go back to Ukraine. And I think now with this war, they almost didn't have time to think about what they're going to take with them or a bag. All they were concerned about was getting their kids out. And some of them, we've managed to find them in Poland. My friends have received calls from them because they've had a SIM card given to them on the Polish side. So that's been a little bit easier, but yeah, it's challenging now. The big thing will be if they don't contact with them or they don't have contact, who knows where they will be living, whether it'll be in Lithuania, Finland, Canada, US. So if we stay put, maybe they'll find us.
Marina Erichek, we appreciate your time. All the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Planning a March break getaway? Perhaps it's your first big trip since the start of the pandemic. What you need to know as you hit the road and the skies after this.
Job is to diagnose tissue biopsies.
This program is being beamed from the University of British Columbia up to Anik B, some 22,500 miles in the atmosphere, to this small studio at the Department of Communications Research Centre in Shirley's Bay. The idea is simple, that doctors in BC are asking the advice of 2 Ottawa pathologists in diagnosing several cancer patients.
They don't really have the features which you described of normal surface epithelium with cilia on the surface. They're very tightly cohesive. There's quite a variation in size of the nucleus, and it's very deep.
This technology is ready for use. It's been refined over the last 4 years when it was first used in a pilot experiment between doctors at the University of Western Ontario and Moose Jaw. Then it was beamed from the Hermes experimental communication satellite, which has become inoperative. Back then, there were problems in getting good color and clear pictures. Today, these problems are solved. But today's demonstration is just that. This system isn't being used anywhere in Canada now. The costs of running it on a commercial satellite are high. But the potential for future use is great.
For instance, somebody has a bone tumor and they're not quite sure whether it's benign or malignant, and this of course is immensely important to the patient because it means whether he or she might have his leg amputated. Then a decision like this obviously should be one that you discuss with colleagues, and if it was possible for a person, a pathologist faced with this decision, to communicate with other pathologists across the country who have expertise in that field, and they come to an agreement on the diagnosis, well then this is a much more secure basis for deciding whether someone should lose their leg or not.
Doctors in remote areas of the country could use telemedicine to get the best medical advice in the quickest possible way. It only takes half a second for a message to travel via satellite. It could also be used for teleconferences involving a large number of doctors. It costs about $1.5 million a year just to rent a full satellite channel. Then you need ground stations, personnel, and more satellites. So for now, telemedicine can only be seen from time to time at these research studios outside Ottawa. But federal grants have been given to begin a telemedicine program in the Atlantic provinces and the West. Marilyn Reid, CBC News, Ottawa.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight for you on CBC Vancouver News.
If their track record is 8 months to even start debris cleanup, it concerns me how long it's going to take to get things done.
I'd like to start by acknowledging how incredibly difficult it's been for the people of Lytton to see their homes and community burned to the ground and to have their lives uprooted.
More than 8 months after a fire laid waste to their village, crews will soon start clearing out debris from Lytton. In fact, tomorrow, the BC government has pledged more than $18 million more to help rebuild that community.
We're hearing a lot from residents who themselves or their families have suffered and been victims of crime, or they're just really worried about their own personal safety.
From stabbings in coffee shops to crime sprees on the street, Vancouver police say there are up to 4 random attacks in the city every day. The force says it began tracking the number of random assaults during the pandemic, so there's not earlier data to compare it to. Other experts wonder about the impact of pandemic isolation and stigma.
I think what you're seeing is that people everywhere are taking a look at their personal family transportation model, what they need to get to work, get the groceries, get the kids to some hockey practice.
And as drivers stare at gas well over $2 a litre in some parts of BC, some of them may be thinking to switch to electric vehicles, another alternative sooner rather than later. The gas price hike is blamed on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Despite the surging costs, the BC government says it does not plan to offer rebates or stop collecting tax on fuel. With the pandemic situation improving in some areas of Canada and restrictions easing across the country, many Canadians will soon be taking a March break holiday. As Ali Chiasson explains, Canadian public health officials are sharing tips on how best to prepare for a fun and safe trip.
Need a vacation? You're freer and safer to do that now compared to last year. But COVID-19 is still circulating, and now that restrictions have eased and you can travel again, Health Canada recommends the following. Checking in on local epidemiological data. Are you visiting a hotspot? Any outbreaks you need to be aware of? Still, pack sanitizer and masks. Be aware of any local restrictions or mandates so you're not caught by surprise. If you're traveling within Canada, you'll notice restrictions vary from province to province. Alberta and Saskatchewan no longer have mask or vaccine requirements, whereas BC and Quebec will still be checking vax status for a few more weeks. But regardless if you're staying here or flying outside of Canada, Dr. Teresa Tam says one of the best things you can do is
getting up to date with COVID-19 vaccines, including getting a booster dose if you're eligible, and especially for those aged 50 years or older, is important preparation for safer activities and travels.
Then you've just got to do your own risk assessment.
It's the same thing, you need to look at your own personal situation, your risk factors, and then obviously look at the situation and where you're going and what's the epidemiology, like how widely is the virus circulating in your destination. And then, of course, look at what kind of activities you're going to be doing. If you're going to be spending most of your time outdoors, maybe, hiking.
As opposed to
a vacation outside the country where you will be mostly indoors, maybe, bar hopping or whatever.
No matter what style of holiday you're after, public health officials agree as the Omicron wave recedes, a return to normal life is prudent, but
we must use all that we have learned to do this safely and make it last.
Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
A first gold on the ski hill for Canada in Beijing. We show you a British Columbia's winning snowboard cross run next. And just before 6:44, a live look at Tofino tonight. A warm 13 degrees this afternoon on the west coast of Vancouver Island. But we're due for showers here in Metro Vancouver tonight. Johanna will have your BC-wide forecast after this. Exciting action from the Paralympic Games as Cranwell River's Tyler Turner took home para-snowboard gold for Canada, the first ever gold medal for our country in that sport. Take a look at this.
And safely over the first spine of the Wu-Tang.
And here we go. Keep your eye on Tyler Turner in red for Team Canada. He's going to go out to the lead. That's going to be Wu Zhonghui from China in green in that second spot. Mike Schultz in blue, looking for an opportunity for Team USA in the number 3 spot, looking for the bronze medal. Tyler Turner is off to the races. He's going to be tough. Is the battle going to be for silver and bronze? Because Tyler Turner is going to be tough to catch at this point. And that's going to be green. Wu Zhonghui. And look at the tangle up right here. We're getting between our competitors. Tyler Turner, no one's challenging him for the number 1 spot. And Mike Schultz has moved into a silver medal position now. Schultz for Team USA sitting in the silver. Tyler Turner running away with the lead here. So the gold could be his. He looks back to see where the competitors are. They're nowhere near. He's just got to focus on the task at hand. So Tyler Turner to the final jump for Canada. Tyler Turner, landing gear down, he grabs the gold. The silver goes to Schultz. And Wu Zhonghui from China with the bronze.
What a race. Absolutely dominated by Tyler Turner from the top. And there were some risky moments as the rest of the field came together, but this man nailed it.
No kidding.
Nailed it.
I love those races, Joe. Para snowboard cross, snow cross, like,
So
just
do I.
so cool. Can't do it. I just like watching it.
I like to pretend I can do it. That's my viewing.
I can't go
activity.
that
Yeah,
fast.
Very
No.
cool. Way to go, Tyler.
Yeah, totally. And I happened to look at the temperature for Beijing, at least now. It was like 9 degrees. And I don't know what the temperature was during that race. But interesting that getting a little warmer there, getting a little warmer here.
I'm glad that you checked Beijing temperature. I had not looked today. I was going to have to quickly try and translate the weather on the West Coast all around the world. But yes, things are warming up in the Northern Hemisphere everywhere. It will officially be spring in 2 weeks. On the 20th, that's when, I think it's 8:44 a.m. Pacific time, it officially becomes spring. So the signs are all around us, all around the Northern Hemisphere. Let me take you to the big picture across Canada. We are still seeing some wintry weather in places like Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Went from rain to freezing rain to a good 5 centimeters of snow, and that's still falling tonight. It's going to move across to Atlantic Canada, a quick 5 centimeters. We're still seeing minus double-digit temperatures in through parts of Atlantic Canada, the prairies, I should say, although -9 with a wind chill in St. John's, feeling like the minus double digits. We've got that Arctic air back for parts of British Columbia, feeling the wind chills in the -20 range for places like Fort St. John and Prince George tonight. And that is coming with a fresh skip of snow. You can see overnight tonight into Tuesday, some flurries continuing, but watch what rebuilds in for Wednesday. That is a brand new high pressure system. The sinking air around a high will lead to clearing skies for Wednesday, Thursday, and part of Friday, and that goes for most of the province. If you're in the Kootenays, you've still got a couple more centimeters, 5 to 10 centimeters tonight, and then another couple for tomorrow. Starting the day off with a few showers at the Okanagan. Prince George, you've got those lingering flurries with those cold temperatures, but quite the clear out as we head into the afternoon. Temperatures also quite a bit colder than where they were, but lots of sunshine as we see that new high pressure build in. And we're going to see a general warm up as I take you through the week. Here's Wednesday into Thursday. Those afternoon highs will be a good 6 to 7 degrees warmer by the time we hit the end of the week. For the interior, it's less notable for us on the South Coast than the overnight lows. Once we get into that sunshine for Wednesday, Dan, really notice how cold those mornings will get. It's feeling like spring, but a reminder that it's not quite spring.
That's why we come to you for the science. Before, after.
No problem.
Love it.
No problem.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Now, getting a photo that actually looks like you can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, particularly if you are a person of color. There is a long history of cameras and photographs not reflecting certain skin tones realistically. But as Nisha Patel explains, artificial intelligence is changing that.
I always show up as too dark or shiny.
For people of color, photography is rarely picture perfect.
Historically,
film, and even phone cameras weren't developed for black and brown skin.
Now, with costly ads at NBA All-Star Weekend and the Super Bowl, Google is making a marketing push. The tech giant says its new Pixel 6 phone has the most inclusive camera.
With Real Tone, you really see the nuances.
The Real Tone feature uses artificial intelligence to make darker skin tones look more natural in pictures. It's a pitch that caught the attention of Toronto photographer O'Shane Howard.
I don't think anybody wants to see a version of them that is not authentic. They're just shown like in the shadows, or they look super desaturated.
Howard has shot campaigns for big brands like Roots and Joe Fresh. He says smartphone cameras have a tough time rendering darker skin tones accurately. And it's about time tech companies brought the issue into focus.
We want to ensure that every single person is going to be represented in the best light, not just one specific person.
Want to take an indoor picture?
Yes,
you
I
pop
do.
on a cube?
It's a problem that goes back to the era of film cameras.
They just assumed that their consumers were light-skinned.
So companies like Kodak used LightSkin as their baseline for processing and printing film. This marketing expert says Google may be more vocal about inclusivity as it tries to make up for those past stumbles.
I do think potentially other businesses will follow suit if this becomes something that is a big deal and makes them really successful.
Other phone makers haven't made specific marketing claims. Apple says it's gotten feedback from photographers to improve skin tone processing. As for Samsung, when asked how its camera technology is developed, the company didn't respond. Whether Google lives up to its claims will be up to consumers who vote with their wallets.
So if you were to take a selfie of yourself right now, what does that look like?
It's good. I actually look like this in real life.
And while he approves of the photos, Howard says,
brown-skinned people, dark-skinned people specifically need to be included in these rooms, at these tables, having a final say.
And he hopes big tech will keep thinking about the big picture. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
It is one of the most unique and challenging races on Earth. Why this year's Iditarod is extra special. Coming up.
This is what I love, and this is what I want to do. My name's Etta Love. I am 14 years old, and I'm an Olympic weightlifter. It doesn't mean that I always feel like weightlifting is the most fun thing in the world, but it means that doesn't take away from it being a sanctuary. Every time that I enter this gym, or any gym, I just feel calmer. It feels like a safe space. It feels like a sanctuary. I started CrossFit when I was like 4 in the kids CrossFit class, and I've been lifting since probably when I was 9 or 10. I was trying to qualify for Junior Worlds, and I needed a 210 total. So I did that with a 95 kilo snatch and a 115 kilo clean and jerk. I had the initial reaction after I dropped it of like, oh, that just happened, I did it. And then I just remember thinking, Junior Worlds, like this is actually happening. Right now, kind of a lot of my competitions are just going towards a new experience. So I'm not trying to qualify like that 115 felt cool, but it was what that 115 meant for me is getting to travel to Greece, getting to go to a competition that I wanted to go to my whole life. I definitely don't go into a competition like Junior Worlds feeling like, you know, I'm not the best one there, I'm not the strongest one there, I'm not, but I guess maybe ready to learn. That's my mindset, is that at this competition, I'll go to some where I'm ready to compete, I'm ready to win. But this one is ready to learn about that experience so that in a few years I can go there with the mindset of competing. Being in a bigger pond is something I'm choosing to do. You know, I could go to smaller competitions and feel like the best weightlifter ever, or I can actually like reach for a dream. Most people, when they start lifting, they know how many years they have left, or they know that they'd retire when they're 28 or something. And for me, that's a really long period of time. So there's all of this like unknown, which builds pressure, because then it makes you feel like there's anything is possible, which then is pressure. But yeah, being young at those competitions definitely takes away the pressure of like winning or placing and stuff, because it's just, I get to learn now. And so I think that it applies to a lot of things, not just sports, but any interest that you have, anything, I think that you can trust yourself, I guess, to follow that, and that not to be afraid of what you want.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. On March 16th, join the Black Business Association of BC and the cast and crew of CBC's new hit series, The Porter, for a conversation about diversity and inclusion in TV and film. The free virtual event will explore the panelists' experiences filming The Porter and discuss the importance of Black inclusion in film. Learn more and register at blackbusinessbc.ca.
The world's most famous sled dog race is underway. The Iditarod Trail Race is back with a woof for the 50th year. Sledders dashed off the starting line north of Anchorage, Alaska.
1, go.
And we're off. 49 teams of dogs and mushers took the official start yesterday. The Iditarod takes about 9 days to complete. This year's overall trail has been restored to its traditional 1,600-kilometer distance from Anchorage to the Bering Sea town of Nome after the pandemic forced a shortening of the course last year. 17 women are competing in this year's race. It's one of the world's few high-profile sporting events where women and men compete on an equal footing. Reminder, you can watch CBC Vancouver News at 6 on CBC Gem. That's our free app. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and of course our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is tonight at 11 o'clock with Zara Premji right after the National. Good night.